Welcome back to the Rulebook Room. I'm Hard. Today we are discussing one of the most significant constitutional and personal law decisions in modern Indian legal history, the Supreme Court's decision in Shaira Bano versus Union of India decided on 22nd August 2017. This is the judgment that transformed the legal landscape of Muslim family law in India by examining the validity of talaq-i-bidat, popularly known as instant triple talaq. But this case is about much more than divorce. It is about the relationship between personal law and constitutional law. It is about the tension between religious freedom and gender justice. It is about whether a practice can continue merely because it is old. And perhaps most importantly, it is about the role of constitutional courts when individual dignity collides with deeply entrenched social and religious practices. To truly appreciate the significance of this judgment, we need to begin not in 2017, but much earlier. For centuries, Muslim personal law in India governed matters relating to marriage, divorce, maintenance, guardianship, inheritance, and succession. In 1937, the Muslim Personal Law Shariat Application Act was enacted to ensure that questions relating to marriage and divorce would be decided according to Muslim personal law rather than local customs. 2 years later, the Dissolution of Muslim Marriages Act 1939 was enacted. That background to that legislation is extremely important because it reveals that Muslim personal law itself had evolved over time to address hardships faced by women. The statement of objects and reasons acknowledged that strict application of the Hanafi school often caused severe hardship to Muslim women, and therefore legislative intervention was necessary to provide grounds on which women could seek dissolution of marriage. This historical background becomes crucial because one of the arguments in Shaira Bano was that personal laws are not frozen in time. They have evolved before and can evolve again. Now let us come to the facts. Shaira Bano was married to Rizwan Ahmed in 2002. The marriage lasted for several years and produced two children. According to Shaira Bano, her marital life was marked by persistent cruelty, harassment, demands for dowry, physical abuse, and coercive treatment. She alleged that she was beaten, confined, administered medicines against her will, and subjected to serious mistreatment by her husband and his family. Eventually, she returned to her parental home. Attempts were allegedly made by her husband to persuade her to return, but the relationship had already broken down. Thereafter, the husband instituted proceedings for restitution of conjugal rights. While these disputes were ongoing, Shaira Bano received a communication from her husband purporting to dissolve the marriage through instant triple talaq. This became the turning point. Rather than merely challenging her own divorce, Shaira Bano approached the Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Indian Constitution. Her challenge was not limited to her personal grievance. She attacked the constitutional validity of three practices. First, talaq-i-bidat or instant triple talaq. Second, polygamy. And third, nikah halal. However, the principal focus of the Constitution bench ultimately became talaq-i-bidat. Before we understand the legal issues, we need to understand what triple talaq actually is. Traditional Sunni jurisprudence recognizes different forms of talaq. The most approved is talaq-e-asan, where a single pronouncement is followed by a waiting period known as iddat, allowing opportunities for reconciliation. Another recognized form is talaq-e-hasan, involving successive pronouncements over time with opportunities to reconsider. Then comes talaq-i-bitat. This is the controversial form where a husband pronounces talaq triple times in one sitting and claims that marriage stands immediately and irrevocably dissolved. The crucial point is that even many Islamic scholars have historically considered talaq-e-bidat sinful, irregular, and contrary to Quranic ideals. The Supreme Court recorded submissions that the practice was widely regarded as bad in theology but good in law. That phrase became one of the defining themes of the litigation. The petitioners argued that Quran emphasizes deliberation, reconciliation, and fairness in marital disputes. The court examined Quranic verses which require waiting periods, opportunities for reconciliation, and the involvement of arbitrators from both families before a marriage is dissolved. According to petitioners, instant triple talaq bypassed every one of these safeguards. The legal issues before the constitutional bench therefore became extraordinarily important. The first question was whether talaq-e-bidat was protected as an essential part of Islam. The second question was whether Muslim personal law fell within the scope of constitutional scrutiny under Article 13. The third question was whether instant triple talaq violates Article 14, 15, and 21 of the Constitution. The fourth question was whether constitutional morality could justify judicial intervention even in matters touching religion. And finally, the court had to determine whether a practice that many regarded as religious could survive if produced arbitrary and unequal consequences for women. The constitutional dimension of the case cannot be overstated. The petitioners argued that instant triple talaq allowed a Muslim husband to unilaterally terminate a marriage without notice, without justification, without reconciliation, and without any participation by the wife. Such a power, they argued, was the very definition of arbitrariness. If one spouse possesses an unrestricted power to destroy the marital relationship while the other has no corresponding authority, can that arrangement be reconciled with constitutional equality? That became the central constitutional challenge. The Union of India supported the petitioners and argued that practices which discriminate against women cannot be insulated from constitutional scrutiny merely because they are associated with religion. The government relied upon Articles 14, 15, and 21 and also drew attention to India's obligations under international human rights instruments. The court was reminded that India is a signatory to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, commonly known as CEDAW. The government emphasized that discrimination against women undermines equality, dignity, and full participation in society, and that states are expected to take legislative and legal measures to eliminate such discrimination. The petitioners also pointed out something extremely significant. Several Muslim majority countries had already reformed and restricted instant triple talaq through legislation. The argument was simple. If nations that officially identify themselves with Islam have regulated or abolished the practice, then it becomes difficult to argue that instant triple talaq is an untouchable and indispensable part of the faith. So by the time the court began hearing arguments, the dispute had evolved into something far larger than a matrimonial conflict. It had become a constitutional conversation about equality, dignity, religion, reform, and the limits of judicial power. And at the center of this conversation stood a simple but profound question. Can a practice that is considered sinful by many Islamic scholars, criticized by several Muslim countries, and challenged as arbitrary but affected women, continue to enjoy legal protection in a constitutional democracy committed to equality? That is the question the constitutional bench had to answer. Now, once the constitutional challenge was admitted, the Supreme Court constituted a 5 judge constitutional bench, and the composition of that bench itself reflected the significance of the case. The bench consisted of Chief Justice Jagdish Singh Khehr, Justice Kurian Joseph, Justice Rohington Nariman, Justice Yu Lalit, and Justice Abdul Nazir. Interestingly, the judges came from different religious backgrounds, symbolizing the court's effort to approach the issue from constitutional rather than a sectarian perspective. What followed was one of the most fascinating constitutional debates in modern Indian legal history. At its heart was a deceptively simple question: can the Constitution review invalidate a practice that forms part of personal law? This question was not new. For decades, Indian courts had struggled with the relationship between personal laws and fundamental rights. And naturally, the discussion led back to one of the controversial Bombay High Court decision from 1952, State of Bombay versus Narasu Appa Malli. Now, if you are a law student, remember this case because it appears repeatedly whenever personal law and constitutional rights collide. In Narasu Appa Malli, the Bombay High Court had taken the view that personal laws are not laws within the meaning of Article 13 of the Constitution. Why is that important? Because Article 13 declares that laws inconsistent with fundamental rights are void. So, if personal laws are not laws under Article 13, then theoretically they cannot be struck down for violating fundamental rights. This became one of the central battleground in Shaira Bano. The respondents defending triple talaq argued that Muslim personal law enjoys constitutional protection and lies beyond the reach of Article 13. The petitioners, on the other hand, argued that once a practice acquires legal recognition and affects civil rights, constitutional scrutiny becomes unavoidable. This debate occupied a substantial portion of the hearing. But there was another equally important constitutional question. Even if personal law receives protection under Article 25 as a matter of religious freedom, does every religious practice automatically becomes immune from judicial review? The answer was not obvious. Article 25 guarantees freedom of religion, but Article 25 itself is subject to public order, morality, health, and other provisions of Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. In other words, religious freedom is not absolute. The court has repeatedly held that only essential religious practices receive constitutional protection. So the next question became: is talaq-e-bidat an essential religious practice? The petitioners argued that it was not. They pointed out that Quran prescribes a carefully structured process for divorce. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes reconciliation, reflection, waiting periods, and attempts by family members to resolve disputes before dissolution of marriage. Triple talaq in one sitting bypasses every one of those safeguards. According to the petitioners, therefore, instant triple talaq was not merely undesirable, it was fundamentally inconsistent with the Quran itself. This argument gained considerable traction during the hearings. The court examined Islamic scholarship, historical commentaries, and Quranic principles in extraordinary detail. One recurring theme emerged. While talaq-e-bidat had been recognized by some Sunni schools, particularly the Hanafi school, it was generally considered as sinful, irregular, or undesirable. Many scholars described it as legally effective but morally condemned. This distinction became crucial because if a practice is merely tolerated rather than mandated by religion, can it truly qualify as an essential religious practice? Justice Corian Joseph would later answer this question in a very significant manner. But before we come to that, let us examine the arguments concerning equality. The petitioners contended that instant triple talaq violates Article 14. Remember, Article 14 prohibits arbitrary state action and guarantees equality before law? The argument was straightforward. A Muslim husband could dissolve the marriage instantly and unilaterally. He needed no reason, he needed no judicial oversight, he needed no consent from the wife, he needed no process of reconciliation. The wife had absolutely no comparable power. Such an arrangement, the petitioners argued, was inherently unequal. More importantly, it was arbitrary. And arbitrariness had long been recognized by the Supreme Court as the antithesis of equality. The challenge also invoked Article 15, which prohibits discrimination on grounds of sex. The petitioners argued that instant triple talaq entrenched gender inequality by giving one spouse powers denied to the other. Then came Article 21. Over the years, Article 21 has expanded far beyond mere physical liberty. The Supreme Court had interpreted it to include dignity, autonomy, privacy, and the right to live with self respect. The petitioners argued that allowing a husband to destroy a marriage instantly and unilaterally strips a woman of dignity and security. A marital relationship cannot be reduced to something that exists solely at the will of one party. The Union government strongly supported these submissions. It argued that constitutional values of equality and dignity must prevail over practices that perpetuate discrimination. The government emphasized that constitutional interpretation should remain consistent with international commitments whenever possible. This was not a completely novel argument. Indian constitutional jurisprudence had frequently relied upon international human rights instruments while interpreting fundamental rights. Cases like Vishakha had already demonstrated how international norms can assist constitutional interpretation when domestic law is silent or ambiguous. Thus, international law did not replace constitutional analysis. Rather, it reinforced constitutional values of equality and dignity. Now let us turn to the judgments. And this is where things become particularly interesting. The court delivered three separate opinions. Justice Rohinton Nariman and Justice U. Lalit wrote a joint opinion. Justice Corian Joseph delivered a separate concurring opinion. Chief Justice Kheher and Justice Abdul Nazir delivered a dissenting opinion. The final result was 3:2 majority striking down instant triple talaq. But the judges reached the conclusion through different routes. Justice Nariman's opinion was perhaps the most constitutionally direct. He held that talaq-e-bidat derived statutory recognition through the Muslim Personal Law Shariat Application Act 1937. Because the practice derived legal force through legislation, it became subject to Article 13. Once Article 13 applied, the practice could be tested against fundamental rights. Justice Nariman then examined whether instant triple talaq satisfied constitutional standards. His answer was emphatic. A practice that allows one spouse to destroy a marriage capriciously, whimsically, and without any procedural safeguards is manifestly arbitrary. and manifestly arbitrary law violates Article 14. Therefore, Talaq-e-Bidat could not survive constitutional scrutiny. This reasoning was groundbreaking because it firmly connected personal law practices to constitutional equality. Justice Lalit agreed entirely with this analysis. Together, they formed two votes in favor of invalidating triple talaq. But the third vote came from a different direction. Justice Korean Joseph adopted an approach rooted more directly in Islamic law itself. He asked a different question. Instead of asking whether triple talaq violates Article 14, he asked whether triple talaq is actually sanctioned by the Quran. After examining Quranic principles governing divorce, he concluded that it is not. According to Justice Korean Joseph, what is contrary to the Quran cannot claim protection as an essential part of Islam. His famous conclusion was elegantly simple. What is bad in theology cannot be good in law. In other words, if the foundational religious texts themselves disapprove of the practice, the courts need not protect it merely because it historically existed. This provided the decisive third vote. Together, Justices Nariman, Lalit, and Korean Joseph formed the majority. And with that, instant triple talaq stood invalidated. But the story is not complete without understanding the dissent, because the dissent raises some of the most important constitutional questions in the entire case. And that is where we turn next. Now, before we celebrate the majority judgment, we need to spend some time with the dissent, because constitutional law is often shaped as much by dissents as by majorities. Chief Justice J.S. Kheher and Justice Abdul Nazir disagreed with the majority and took a fundamentally different view of the relationship between personal law and constitutional review. Their starting point was that talaq-e-bidat, however undesirable it may appear, had been practiced for centuries among sections of the Sunni Muslim community. The question before the court, according to them, was not whether the practice was morally attractive or socially progressive. The question was whether the Constitution permitted judges to invalidate it. The dissent emphasized that Article 25 protects religious freedom. According to Chief Justice, once a practice forms part of a recognized school of personal law and has been followed over a long period of time, courts should exercise extreme caution before interfering with it. The dissent accepted that instant triple talaq may be sinful. It accepted that many Muslims themselves disapproved of it. It even acknowledged that the practice may be considered undesirable and regressive. Yet, constitutional validity and moral desirability are not always identical questions. The dissent reasoned that courts cannot strike down a religious practice merely because they regard it as bad or outdated. Otherwise, judges would become arbiters of theology rather than interpreters of law. This distinction is very important. The dissent was essentially saying reform may be necessary, but reform should come from Parliament, not from judges. The Chief Justice therefore proposed a different solution. Rather than invalidating triple talaq judicially, he suggested that the practice should be suspended temporarily and that Parliament should enact legislation addressing the issue. In effect, the dissent invited legislative reform while refusing judicial intervention. This demonstrates something fascinating about constitutional adjudication. All five judges were troubled by instant triple talaq. All five recognized the hardship it would inflict upon women. The disagreement was not about the social problem. The disagreement was about institutional competency. Who should solve the problem? The judiciary or the legislation? That was the real divide. The majority answered the Constitution requires judicial intervention. The dissent answered reform should come through democratic legislation. And that brings us to the final result. By a majority of 2 is to 3, the Supreme Court declared Talaq-e-Bidat invalid. The practice could no longer be used to dissolve a marriage instantaneously and irrevocably. The legal effect was immediate and profound. A Muslim husband could no longer terminate a marriage merely by pronouncing talaq 3 times in one sitting. The court had effectively removed instant triple talaq from the legal landscape of India. Now let us pause and identify ratio decidendi of the case. This is particularly important for examinations and legal analysis. The first ratio emerges from the opinion of Justices Nariman and Lalit. A practice that derives legal recognition through legislation may be subjected to constitutional scrutiny. If such a practice is manifestly arbitrary, it violates Article 14 and cannot survive constitutional review. The second ratio emerges from Justice Kurian Joseph's opinion. A practice contrary to the Quran cannot be regarded as an essential part of Islam merely because it has been historically followed. The court repeatedly emphasized reconciliation, fairness, deliberation, and procedural justice as principles embedded within the Quranic framework. In that sense, the judgment can also be read as an attempt to distinguish between religious principles and later legal practices that may have drifted away from those principles. The case, therefore, occupies an unusual position. It is simultaneously a constitutional law case, a family law case, a gender justice case, and a personal law case. Few judgments managed to sit at the intersection of so many legal disciplines. The story, however, did not end in 2017. The Supreme Court's judgment was followed by legislative action. In 2019, Parliament enacted the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Act, the statute declaring pronouncement of instant triple talaq as void and illegal, and also introduced penal consequences for the practice. Whether criminalization was the best legislative response remains debated among scholars and lawyers. Some argue that it strengthened protection for Muslim women. Others question whether criminal sanctions are appropriate in matters arising out of matrimonial disputes. But regardless of those debates, the legislative response demonstrates the enormous impact of Shaira Bano decision. It fundamentally alters the legal framework governing Muslim divorce in India. So, what is the lasting legacy of Shaira Bano? Its legacy is not merely that triple talaq was invalidated. Its deeper significance lies in the constitutional conversation it initiated. The case compelled courts, lawyers, scholars, and citizens to confront difficult questions. Can personal law be insulated from constitutional values? How should courts balance religious freedom with gender equality? When does judicial intervention becomes necessary? And how should constitutional democracies respond when tradition and rights appear to collide? These questions remain relevant far beyond Muslim personal law. They continue to influence debates surrounding family law, religious freedom, equality, and constitutional reform. For law students, Shaira Bano is not merely a case to memorize, it is a case to think about because it reveals how constitutional law operates in the real world, not through abstract theories alone, but through the lives of individuals. through competing visions of justice, through disagreements among judges, and through constant effort to reconcile liberty, equality, dignity, and faith within a constitutional democracy. And perhaps that is why Shaira Bano remains one of the most important constitutional decisions of modern India. Not because it answers every question, but because it forced us to ask the right ones. Thank you for joining me in this episode of the Rule Book Room. I'm Harp. Until next time, bye.